Thank you very much for finding time to come to the studio of Invest for Site and media partner for the GADAR forum here in Moscow. And I wonder if we could find out your ideas about the efficiency and performance of the BRICS as an instrument actually conceived as a response to global financial crisis. The crisis, as far as I'm aware, is over, but BRICS is still here. Why so?
Yes, and thank goodness for that. Yes, we've been watching the BRICS even before it burst on the scene as a summit-level institution, thanks to the initiative of the Russian presidency in 2009, Yekaterinburg, the first summit. But it was really, of course, a Russian invention at the finance ministers level before that. But as a summit-level institution, I think it sent a very powerful message to the world at the beginning. The G20 summit was the first responder to the global financial crisis, which erupted September 15th, 2008 in New York City. It was born with two distinctive foundational missions. One was to promote financial stability. The other was to make globalization work for all. But after the first summit in Washington, D.C., George Bush, a highly market-oriented approach, many of the members, particularly from the emerging countries, but some developed ones, Gordon Brown of the United Kingdom, said, look, okay, we've stopped the immediate financial crisis born in the USA, but what about making globalization work for the benefit of all? And that's why a BRICS summit, the big emerging economies, with Russia having a critical role then as being a member of the G8 and the new BRICS group, really made the G20 itself act on its second foundational mission and thus preserved financial stability, not in money markets of New York City, but by building the structural foundations for the developing countries themselves. So once the G20 with the BRICS help actually ended not just the American turned global financial crisis, but then stopped the European financial crisis from going global by 2013, when the Russian Federation hosted the G20 summit in St. Petersburg. It really was able to take, with the full support of its BRICS members within the G20, take the G20 to focus like a laser beam on its second mission of inclusiveness. It was called inclusive growth, but making globalization work for all. And I think the fact that we've not yet had even a regional financial crisis, or even one in a single country that's spread to its immediate neighbors, Argentina, the latest test case, right? I think shows not just the success of the G20 summit, but the success of the BRICS summit and the BRICS summit at the G20 summit and within the G20.
But on the other hand, economists will say that the history shows, relatively recent history shows, that the financial crisis comes every 12 years, something like that. So does it mean that this year we're going to confront, well, maybe not a crisis, but some financial turmoil elsewhere, in Europe, globally, or in a major national economy?
Well, the one thing about financial crises, despite the haunting periodicity and the vision of Mr. Kondratiev and his business cycles come to mind, you never quite know when there will be a Minsky moment, as economists say. So where and when, we don't know. But you're quite right. the G20 was born at the finance ministers level because of the Asian-turned global financial crisis from 1997 to 1999, and did a good job, but then boom, the big surprise of 2008. So we've got 12 years this time, and while there's a lot of suspects out there, one worries about China, about, my goodness, Argentina could pop up again. Some people worry about various debt markets in the United States or more globally. The ever heavy debt burden as a percentage of GDP, government debt, corporate debt, individual debt. So much to worry about. But what we do know is that the BRICS has now put in place instruments that are working, that could be first responders when the next one hits. We no longer have to rely, thank goodness, on just the central banks of the United States or the United Kingdom or the Europeans, right? You've got the BRICS New Development Bank with money, and it could raise more money as well. You've got the emergence of swap lines amongst the BRIC members themselves that could defend them as part of an overall coordinated passage. And I think back to the decisive moment that ended the European financial crisis, this at the G20 Las Cabas Summit in June 2012. What did it was all of the G20 members, without the United States, assembled a firewall fund, $500 billion, and just the message alone was enough deterrence. The speculators backed off. Every BRICS member contributed to that firewall fund. China, the big contributor, but Russia and others too. Think of it. I grew up in a world since we won the Second World War, together the Great Patriotic War, where it was always the United States that was the lender of last resort, the spender of last resort. In 2012, it was absent, and it was the BRICS and the broader group of G20 countries, including the other emerging members, that took over that function. So I think the next time, we need a coordinated first responder. The world will be looking to the BRICS and its leaders, tried and true. One thinks of the experience, of Vladimir Putin. I guess Mr. Xi's been around for a while too. I don't think the world is going to be looking to the White House in the United States and hoping they'll take the initiative in a smart, sophisticated, strategic way to save the world. So when the next crisis does come, and it inevitably will, I'm confident that our new institutions at the summit level of global governance have evolved to the point, thanks to the BRICS and the BRICS within the G20, that we'll get through it much less painfully than we did in 2008 and 2009. Or I can't help but remember from my friends in the Russian Federation, August 1998, right? So never again.
Right. The members of BRICS, they keep saying that it's time for us to make all settlements amongst ourselves in national currencies and get rid of dollar settlements. Do you think that is a way to prevent a new financial crisis or to trigger one?
No, I think it's very important as a contributor to a global financial safety net in more general terms, both to make markets function more efficiently at the moment, but also to deter a new financial crisis and defend us should one come. What we do know about the evolution of the existing global payments system, centered in the United States, the United Kingdom, the European clearing and payments system, is that it was really driven by private sector demand, obviously working with governments, partly because the private sector knew that you could not always count on, going to one government leader to act as the international lender of last resort, the United States president or the head of the Federal Reserve Bank. They also knew that there was, as part of the Bretton Woods architecture, no international, in effect, supranational institution to be an international lender of last resort. So they constructed a private sector led payment system to serve that function, and it's worked very well, right? With a little help from governments at crisis time. So why not the BRICS, now that their own financial transaction amongst themselves are strengthening readily? If we can do it in the field of what we call development, right? You had the World Bank, but then we had, because we needed it, and because the G20 couldn't do it, we had the BRICS New Development Bank, and then the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Some might even add, in a broader field, looking at infrastructure, China's One Belt, One Road initiative, no longer China's, there's about 40 members in it. So why wouldn't we do that in the field of finance too, and at the core of the private sector plumbing system, it's called, the payment system. So I think the sooner the BRICS can bring it into being, the better. We have to remember, of course, that from the beginning of the idea of the BRICS New Development Bank, it took several years before, at the Fortaleza summit, all the leaders looked at each other and said, look, we've been talking about this for years. Now is the moment. If we don't do it, we're going to look like fools, and everybody's going to lose trust or faith in us. So they did it, right? So I think we're approaching the moment without a financial crisis, right, where we might see a real BRICS payment system start to spring to life.
Right. Correct me if I'm mistaken, but it appears that over the past 10 or 15 months, most currencies in the world, they were getting weaker against the US dollar, whereas Russian currency was growing stronger. Is it a good sign or a bad sign, or is it a sign of anything at all?
Well, I think it's a recognition of the real market dynamics, both at the present time and into the future. Despite Mr. Trump's very self-confident speeches about how the United States is back, he's made America great again, it's growing, and the GDP growth indexed in things that count, convertible currencies, exchange rates. He promised us 3%, boom. We haven't gotten it. We haven't come even close. So I think the market is recognizing that. And then one looks next year, he's not going to be able to do a multi-trillion-dollar tax cut for the richest 1%. Again and again and again, and that's the sugar high that's given us the growth in the United States we've seen for the past year or so. So markets know that, and they look elsewhere at countries whose economic fundamentals are moving in the right direction. And unlike the Russian Federation at times past, one can see, despite the sanctions, right, real signs of hope. One thing that strikes me, and I think many others, for the first time in the history of the United States, for the past 3 years, life expectancy in the United States has been going down. In the Russian Federation, it's going up. So if you want to invest in a country that's moving in the right direction, population, healthy, which means productive, show up for work, smart. That's just one of the reasons why the Russian ruble is, we're taking a second look. Another big one for those in the G20, fundamentally focused as they were at the fourth summit in Toronto in June 2010 on deficits and the debt burden, right? Now the United States has hit a new record, $1 trillion fiscal deficit, and its debt burden relative to GDP going up, up, up. Look at the Russian Federation, its next door neighbor over the North Pole, thanks to Alaska, right? And the Russian fiscal balance, strong surplus, right? I mean, most other countries, I guess with the exception of Germany, in the G20 would look with envy at the Russian Federation. And what are those exchange reserves being held in? Well, not currencies that might be a bit wobbly. And here we can think, I guess, of the British pound, right, rather than the US dollars. Gold, hard currencies, real assets as well. So I think there's a lot of fundamental reasons why rational market players would, help the Russian ruble appreciate, and why I think that is something they can count on for the foreseeable future, which is not a long time in foreign exchange markets, but nonetheless, one has to make those calculations that when you push the button on your computer keyboard to a trade.
You mentioned going down economic growth in the United States, whereas in Russia it has been economic growth, I mean, fairly modest over the past 5 or 6 years, 1% around
Indeed. Yeah.
Is it a matter of concern at all?
I think it is. The Russian Federation has not just a medium-term problem, let's say, the sanctions, right? But it has a bigger medium to long-term problem that the United States doesn't have, nor Japan, nor Europe, with or without the United Kingdom. Traditionally, it's been an affluent country because of its magnificent endowments of hydrocarbons, oil and gas, both domestically and then for export. But everything we and almost everyone else in the world knows, because of the climate change crisis, the Russian Federation, and Mr. Putin knows this, just like Saudi Arabia, some parts of Canada have to diversify away from hydrocarbon, and that's tough because it's done so much for us for so long. The whole economic system, the infrastructure is geared towards it, another pipeline. But I think once we see the real serious, sustained, multi-dimensional process of economic diversification in the Russian Federation moving ahead as part of a new strategic plan, I think we can see reasons why Russian growth will hit a new normal, right? Let's call it a not quite post-carbon higher normal, but certainly on the road to that. Let me just take one sector, right? The Russian Federation is in its natural endowments, much like Canada, right? Just hydrocarbons, just but forests, right? So the Russian forest products industry could be a global leader in many ways, especially if forest fires could be controlled. Vast lands, agriculture, right? Russia could be, like Brazil, like the United States, Midwest, the breadbasket of the world, right?
Well, it's becoming.
Indeed.
Like
And those are just the two, I guess, most visible ones. Many others too. One some people have mentioned is the high frontier of the digital world and artificial intelligence. When are all the Russians who moved to Silicon Valley in the States going to come back, right? In a next generation, not leave. That may be starting to happen now. So if the high-tech frontier is the next sector, and everybody does want to diversify there, you know, Russia has got a lot of assets. So lots of sectors to diversify in, as you said, the process is underway. Both the old familiar stuff, food and forests, right? But the new digital world, which people my age are still struggling to comprehend.
Great, thank you very much for